Hey, welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans. From the West Coast, I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Thursday, October 17th, 2024. And thank you for joining me as I talk to myself about Ohio State's disappointing 32-31 road loss to number 3 Oregon, which was also a very highly entertaining game, by the way, I should add. Now, I know I'm a few days late, but your humble host was a bit overserved on Saturday night and found himself in no condition to record a recap pod on Sunday. I also wanted to get around to rewatching the game before sharing my observations, which took a few days, but I've done that. So here we are, and let's jump right into it. So I think there are two seemingly opposing views of this game from the Ohio State perspective that I believe are totally reasonable, and I would not argue against either one. The first, which is what I heard from many of the national shows this week, goes something like, hey, it was a great game between two title contenders that lived up to the hype. Someone had to lose. I'm looking forward to the rematch in the Big Ten title game. That's one view. The other view, which is a bit more bleak, is that there's mounting evidence that Ryan Day, when the stakes are the highest, cannot close in a matchup game against a top 5 opponent. Now, I want to share some numbers which support that second point of view that are courtesy of Bill Landis. Earlier this week, Landis said that in the fourth quarter of Ohio State's last 4 games against top 5 opponents, there were a total of 11 fourth quarter drives by the opponent. 10 of them resulted in points, including 6 touchdowns and 0 punts by the Ohio State defense. The Ohio State offense, conversely, also had a total of 11 fourth quarter drives in those games, which resulted in only 1 touchdown, 2 punts, 3 picks, 4 field goal attempts, and then finally the last possession on Saturday night with the clock running out on Will Howard and the Buckeyes, despite Ryan Day having a timeout left in his pocket. Now, to be fair, it's only 4 games. That's a pretty small sample size, and you also have to consider the caliber of those opponents. It was number 3 Michigan and number 1 Georgia in 2022. It was number 3 Michigan again in the Big House last year, and of course it was number 3 Oregon also on the road last Saturday. So that's 2 road games which Ohio State lost by 1 score but had the ball on the opponent's side of the field with a chance to win at the end of the game. A third on a neutral field, and I'm using air quotes when I say neutral field because that was in Atlanta against number 1 Georgia in the CFP semis, where again Ohio State had the ball deep in Georgia territory to win that game late before losing by just 1 point. And finally, that fourth game that Landis is referencing is the home loss to Michigan in 2022. That was a 1-score game going into the fourth quarter before Michigan pulled away. And of course, knowing what we know now with the Connor Stallions scandal, there are major questions about how Michigan was able to pull away in that game. Now, be all that as it may, those fourth quarter numbers that Bill Landis shared earlier this week don't paint a pretty picture for either Ryan Day or Jim Knowles. And look, we know very well what the goals are in Columbus every single season. It's winning the Big Ten. It's competing for national championships. And look, those are the caliber of opponents you have to beat each and every season to reach those goals. And the reality is, over the last 2.5 seasons, Ryan Day and Jim Knowles just have not been good enough against matchup opponents when it really counts, and that's in the fourth quarter. Now, I'm still sorting through my feelings about the Oregon game, but after rewatching it, I'm actually, I think, much more in the camp of, hey, great game between 2 legit title contenders. Someone had to lose. Looking forward to the rematch in early December. I mean, I think that's where I stand coming out of this game and then rewatching the game earlier this week. And maybe it's because I tend to be a mostly positive person who believes Ohio State's talent and perseverance will eventually start to prevail in these matchup games. I know maybe I'm just afraid to acknowledge the inconvenient truths of Bill Landis's numbers, or maybe it's just because I want to enjoy this season, which I waited for 9 months to get here, and now it's already half over. And I think taking the hopeless view that Ryan Day will never win another matchup game is absolutely just no way to enjoy a season. So maybe it's all those things. Now, there is one major difference between Saturday's result in Eugene and many of these other losses that I've just talked about under Ryan Day. I'll even throw the 2019 playoff semifinal loss to Clemson in there as well. All but one of those games, and that was the 2022 loss to Michigan, were dream-ending losses with no opportunity to learn from the experience, course correct, and then continue the pursuit of a championship. That is not the case with this loss to Oregon, thanks to the 12-team playoff and what is now a divisionless Big Ten conference. Ohio State heads into its second off week with extra time to self-scout, make tweaks, and prepare for another tough back-to-back against Nebraska in the shoe, and then a top-5 matchup with Penn State in Happy Valley. What Ryan Day, Chip Kelly, and Jim Knowles will do with that opportunity, only time will tell. So as I like to do, I'm going to tick down a list of short observations from last Saturday night. I'm going to assume you watched and have probably read, listened, already consumed a lot of other opinions and analysis by now. So, of course, I'm not going to discuss every single play from this game. Let's start with the end, which is what most people have been focusing on. Look, the defense gets a huge stop in the red zone against the Oregon offense, forcing the Ducks into a short field goal, leaving plenty of time, 1:47, trailing by only 1 point for the Ohio State offense to get into field goal range and win this game. And look, in the blink of an eye, it was 1st and 10, Ohio State at the Oregon 28-yard line with plenty of time, 32 seconds and 1 timeout. Now, up to that point, I thought Will Howard had led a masterful 2-minute drive. Now, I know he got sacked to start that drive, but he quickly recovered. But 2 plays after Ohio State reaches the Oregon 28-yard line, Jeremiah Smith gets flagged for an offensive pass interference. And instead of 3rd and short at the Oregon 21, it's 2nd and 25 at the Oregon 43 with only 13 seconds to play. Man, that was just a brutal call that cost Ohio State 22 yards of field possession. The officials had been letting them play all game, and to throw a fucking flag there, it was utterly devastating. Now, 2 plays after that was the now infamous illegal substitution penalty on Oregon, which allowed the Ducks to play a fully timed down with an extra man on the field. Now, Dan Lanning admitted earlier this week that Oregon put that 12th man on the field intentionally, and that allowed the Oregon defense to bracket Jeremiah Smith to prevent a big pass play, and it drained 4 precious seconds off the clock. Lanning was more than happy to trade 5 yards of field position for those 4 seconds. Now, the NCAA this week has since closed that loophole, and now teams have the choice of having time put back on the clock on an illegal substitution penalty. That doesn't do the Buckeyes much good now. But look, it was a savvy move by Dan Lanning. Give him credit. And that left Ohio State with only 6 seconds from the Oregon 38. And as is well documented by now, the game ended with Will Howard sliding at the Oregon 26 as time expired. Now, some people are crucifying Ryan Day and Will Howard for the way the game ended, but I thought Ohio State did exactly what it needed to do in that late game situation, which was drain as much of the clock as possible en route to a game-winning field goal attempt. They were well on track to do that, and the OPI on Jeremiah Smith, whether you want to just call that a freshman mistake or a highly questionable call by the officials, that fucking changed everything. It was just a tough break on the road. That's probably a flag that doesn't fly in this game if it were played in Columbus or on a neutral field. Just a really, really tough break for the Buckeyes. I thought Will Howard otherwise was really, really good in this game. And if you're looking for questions that were answered in the affirmative coming out of this performance, I think it's clear that Ohio State has a quarterback that can help them win a championship. I think that's what Will Howard showed us in this game, despite the way it ended. Howard was 28 of 35 for 326 yards. He accounted for 3 touchdowns, 2 through the air, 1 on the ground. Against the 2 best defenses Ohio State has seen thus far, Oregon and Iowa, Howard has completed 82% of his passes with 6 touchdown passes to only 1 INT, which was against Iowa. He's made a few mistakes here and there, but man, I don't know that we can ask much more of Will Howard than what he's shown us these last 2 weeks. Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, they were magnificent once again against Oregon. They combined for 193 yards on 19 receptions and 2 touchdowns. I thought maybe we should have seen more of Trey Henderson than the 10 carries he got in this game. 87 rushing yards for Henderson in this game. Now, the critics will point out that Henderson got most of that yardage on back-to-back runs at the end of the first quarter that totaled 70 yards, including a 53-yard run that set up Ohio State's second touchdown. The Oregon defense was able to take advantage of what looks like season-ending injuries to both left tackle Josh Simmons and Ohio State's best blocking tight end in Will Kazmarek. More on that in a minute, to slow down the Ohio State run game. But I thought Trey Henderson was underutilized in this game, and there should have been more carries for him, looking back on it now. It was a rough night for Quinshon Judkins, who is also dealing with what is rumored to be a broken right hand. Man, another injury. These injuries are starting to dog this program again. Now, Judkins was stripped by defensive tackle Derek Harmon in the first quarter, which helped set up Oregon's first touchdown of the game. Now, to me, it looked pretty clear that Judkins just could not get a good grip on the ball because of that hand injury. Judkins finished the night with 23 yards on 11 carries. I think he's going to be fine. It was just an off night. And look, I think you got to give the Oregon defense a little credit for playing really well up front. Derek Harmon and linebacker Mateo Uyunglele were really, really good against the Ohio State rushing attack. They were everywhere. And by the way, Harmon and Uyunglele were two players Chad and I talked about in our pregame pod. They were huge for Oregon on Saturday. Now, the biggest concern for me coming out of this game was the Josh Simmons injury, which was a non-contact, like turf injury. I think everyone is assuming it's a torn ACL. It's the one injury Ohio State could least afford. Simmons was far and away their best offensive lineman. And look, in this day and age, with the transfer portal and the NIL, very few teams have a replacement for an elite left tackle just sitting around. And that's especially true for Ohio State. Their struggles in offensive line recruiting under Justin Fry have been very well documented on this podcast. Senior Zen Mikulski replaced Simmons and seemed to have played pretty well in this game, but Mikulski's PFF grades point to the contrary. He finished with an overall grade of 37.6 and a pass blocking grade of 24.6. It's unclear right now if Mikulski is going to be the permanent replacement. Austin Sareveld, who's played well at right guard, has some experience playing tackle. He could be an option. There's also been some discussion about the possibility of moving Donovan Jackson from left guard to left tackle. I don't know. Maybe it's left tackle by committee for these next few weeks. Whatever the solution Justin Fry comes up with, it's likely to be a far cry from Josh Simmons. And it's just a major concern with defensive lines like Penn State and Michigan left on the regular season schedule. And then whatever Ohio State is going to face in the postseason, it's very likely to be, some very good defensive teams with good defensive lines. So this is a huge loss for Ohio State. And I'm not sure what the solution is. I mean, these are desperate times at left tackle for the Buckeyes. Okay, let's flip over to the defense. Now, the Silver Bullets went into Saturday night number one in the country in total defense, defensive yards per play, scoring defense, and in stop rate. They were number 3 nationally against the run. They were 4th nationally against the pass. And they were moving up the national rankings in lost yardage plays and turnovers as well. They were 12th nationally in sacks, tied for 20th in tackles for loss, and tied for 26th in takeaways. They were also number 1 in the country in opponent scrimmage plays of 20-plus yards and 30-plus yards. Now, I said in the preview pod those gaudy numbers would be put to the test by an explosive Oregon offense, and man, I had no idea how bad it would be for the Silver Bullets in this game. Oregon finishes the night with 496 yards of total offense at 7.6 yards per play and 5 yards per carry in the run game for running back Jordan James, who finished the night with 115 yards rushing. Oregon quarterback Dylan Gabriel sliced and diced the Buckeye defense for 341 yards and 3 touchdowns, 2 passing and 1 rushing. He averaged 10 yards per attempt. Wide receiver Evan Stewart exploded for 149 yards receiving on 7 receptions, with most of that yardage coming against Denzel Burke, who played the worst game of his college career. Burke was targeted 8 times for 8 receptions and 179 yards and 2 touchdowns. He did not have a pass breakup. He also tackled very poorly in this game. It was a shocking meltdown by Burke, who was considered by many to be the best player in the country's best secondary. It was just a bad showing all around for BIA. Burke was not the only one who played poorly. I mean, against Iowa, Look, the Silver Bullets forced 3 turnovers, 4 sacks, and 9 tackles for loss. But against Oregon, they did not record a sack or a turnover and finished with only 2 tackles for loss. Now, PFF says the Ohio State defense had 19 pressures on Dylan Gabriel. Without looking it up, I'm pretty sure that's a season high. But watching the game, my eyes did not tell me the defensive line was doing much to bother Gabriel. He seemed to operate very comfortably for much of the night. Now, we've heard a lot of talk over these last few days about the mismatch of Jim Knowles and defensive line coach Larry Johnson. Knowles wants to play a 3-man front with a stand-up jack. Johnson wants to play a 4-man front. What we saw against Oregon was a defensive front mostly out of sync with the secondary, especially when the Buckeyes were in press coverage against the speed of those Oregon receivers. We saw it most of the night. And the result was too many explosive plays. I mean, at least 4 plays of 30-plus yards that I can see right now just looking quickly at the box score, and that included a 69-yard pass reception by Evan Stewart and a 48-yarder by Tez Johnson. Now, having said all that, I think a large amount of credit needs to go to Oregon. There are a lot of NFL players on that offense. I mean, when we looked at Oregon in the preseason, we used Phil Steele's preseason magazine, and he had Oregon with the number 3 quarterback room in America, the number 1 receiver group, and the number 3 offensive line. And I think what we saw on Saturday night backed that up. This is no doubt the best offense Ohio State will see, certainly during the regular season, perhaps all season. I think there's a very good chance they'll see it again, either on December 7th in the Big Ten title game or in the CFP. Now, there were some things I actually liked from the defense in this game. I thought Caleb Downs was awesome. He was everywhere, 8 tackles, 1 tackle for loss. He had 2 pass breakups. Downs drew coverage most of the night on Oregon tight end Terrence Ferguson. Ferguson was a player I was very concerned about coming into this game, and he ended up with 1 impactful catch all night, and that actually came against Denzel Burke. I thought Sonny Styles was also very good for the second week in a row. He finished with 9 tackles. Cody Simon, also really good. He led the defense with 10 tackles. And I thought the defense did have some huge moments in this game that helped position Ohio State to win it. There was the huge 4th and goal stop at the Ohio State 2-yard line in the third quarter to end that Oregon drive on downs. I thought forcing Oregon to settle for a field goal on their last possession in the game was another huge stop. Look, in a game like this with 2 offenses as talented and deep as these two, a field goal is basically a stop. So it wasn't all bad for the Silver Bullets. Those were 2 huge stops. And I still believe in the talent on this unit. I think they can play better. I know they can play better, and I think they will. And I don't think they're, like I say, I don't think they're going to see another offense that comes remotely close to the talents and the depth of this Oregon offense the rest of the regular season. I mean, look, this was a hell of a football game between 2 of the most talented rosters in the country. Could Ohio State have played better? Yes, absolutely, especially on defense. But it was back and forth all night. There were 10 lead changes in this game. I thought Ohio State had an answer for everything Oregon threw at them in a very, very tough place to win. Ohio State did not have their best stuff. That was clear. And you know, it came up just a half second short against one of the 3 best teams in the country. I know fans are pissed, but we are not in blow it up and start over territory. We are not. And I heard Bill Landis and Doug Lesmerises say on their Kings of Columbus podcast yesterday something I found to be very profound, which is the biggest need for this program right now is finding those extra inches in the margins that make the difference in games like this. I mean, look, that's what Dan Lanning did by exploiting that loophole with the illegal substitution penalty. He did that by stealing a possession with an onside kick in the second quarter. That's where this program, Ohio State, is coming up a bit short right now, is in those moments. Maybe I'm just a foolish homer, but I think it's well within the capabilities of this program and this coaching staff to find those, as Lesmerises calls them, extra inches in the margins and start winning these fucking games. I'm still very bullish on this Ohio State team and its talent. All of this team's goals are still in front of them. I'm keeping the faith. And look, as fans, we really have no other choice. What are they going to do? Fire Ryan Day, fire this coaching staff, and bring in Mike Vrabel midseason? That's not going to happen. We have no other choice but to keep the faith. This is the team we have, and what we have is considerably more than most, right? There's a lot to work with here, even with the injuries to Josh Simmons and Will Kazmarek. This team is still loaded. I still believe in it, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they respond to this loss to Oregon, because they have an opportunity here to bounce back with a bye week, extra time to prepare for Nebraska, and then that tough matchup with Penn State. I still have a lot of faith in this team. Okay, that's going to do it for me. Now, even though Ohio State isn't playing, it's still a very interesting slate this Saturday that includes Alabama at Tennessee, Michigan at Illinois, and Georgia at Texas. If a bunch of crazy shit happens on Saturday, I might be inspired to record a recap pod on Sunday. Otherwise, look for a preview of the Nebraska game from Paige, Chad, and myself next Thursday. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and go Bucks. You've been listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. Follow us on X at South_Stands.